Hello, welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. It's the often weird, mostly true, always unique, but never essential weekly stories
God
to
damn.
delight and amaze.
You brought a lot of energy.
I've been
into that.
I've been practicing my intros.
Like we just started the recording. It was so like, all right, I guess we're gonna go now. And then like, fucking welcome to the show.
That's how it is. We have to. People should at least think that we have energy. Like we're not these fat, lazy slugs that I actually am when we're not recording.
Showmanship.
But
yeah.
I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock, and
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
And this is episode 3 of the Non-Essential Podcast, continuing toward our ultimate goal of reaching episode 4.
Everybody said we couldn't do it, right?
I know it's been hard on a lot of you, but we're closer than ever. If you could just donate $50 to our Patreon, I'm confident we'll get there, and then we can end this.
I'd appreciate it if
show.
one of you would contact me first and tell me how to set up the Patreon, and then you can all throw money at it. So if you haven't listened to our first 2 episodes, the Non-Essential Podcast is a series where each week me and Ben bring our own stories to the... stories is a wrong word because it's true stuff. It's not like we're making up once upon a time. Well, entirely.
I mean, you can't say that when half of our episodes were me talking about urban legends.
Ghosts. Yeah. Well, what I mean, it's stuff that exists, like that we found, where it's not like we're sitting here like making up a fantasy like...
Right. If you're new to the show, basically, me and Steve have made the important choice to take our dicking around on the internet that we would be doing anyway, and decided to bring it into a palatable format to you, the listener.
Yeah, to share it. I mean, what good is internet dicking around if you can't share it with everybody else, right?
Well, the internet and the fuckery that goes on it is only good with a good friend, and we want to be that good friend for you. So yeah, two episodes down this week. This week I was a little bit nervous because, once again, we're kind of going back into history with, at least with my story. And, I don't want our listeners to kind of get burnt out on like the history stuff, because I don't want this to just be like a history podcast, because there's a ton of those.
In 1874.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's tons of history podcasts. There's a ton of history comedy podcasts.
And there's people that actually know history. So like,
right. They're not paraphrasing fucking Wikipedia, like I am. But it's, I hope people don't feel too burnt out on it. I will try to change it up, but it's also going to be a common theme on here, is that you and me are going to find, because it turns out a lot of weird shit that is fun to talk about tends to happen in history, and usually the further away something happened, the weirder it is.
Well, more importantly, the further away it happened, the less accurate we have to be on our information, because people aren't...
Exactly.
Right, like if I tried to go back and be like, remember last week when that dude did this thing, you'd all be like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like,
yeah. So last week we talked about Dancing Mania, and you talked about the lady Caligula, who wasn't.
Or maybe a little bit. She was some version of Caligula, somewhere between 0 and 100%. Narrowing it down.
The jury's out among historians. She may have been the worst person in the world, or she may have been okay.
Yeah, okay is about as high as you can go with monarchy, because there's that whole ball of wax to begin with, but
so this week I decided, what are we doing? Why are we fucking around? We know, or at least I know, what I want to talk about in a historical context, and it's pirates.
Arr, matey.
I'm not going to hit you with pirate shit every week. Like I said, I'm going to try to be responsible about it, but
there may be a week where it's just me and Ben singing sea shanties, though, so I'll give you that warning.
That's when we really fall off, and that's coming. That's episode 5.
Yeah.
Like I said, we make it to 4, we're good.
Well, 5 we'll be drunken and celebrating, and there's no way to celebrate drunkenly that's any better than singing.
Right.
What would you do with the drunken sailor?
But like pirates are just great. Like I love the theatrical depiction of them, where it's like these just smelly, unpleasant fuckers. Really, it's all about freedom and the high seas and shit. But I also love like the gritty kind of truth about them, which is like just a fucking miserable life. And they're usually dumb as fuck.
Yeah,
and
it wasn't like they were taking their like Harvard scholars and saying, "Okay, now go ply the high seas, looking to plunder enemy, wealth."
Right, and
it was like, yeah.
And the more you dive into pirates, you find like just great fucking little anecdotes. Like, this isn't the man I'm going to talk about today, but he was like Blackbeard's predecessor, basically. His name was Benjamin Hornigold. And I read a story about how, great name. And
especially for a pirate, yeah.
Benjamin Randy Money. That's what I'm changing my name to.
Well, Randy Money sounds like an 80s rock like singer.
Yeah, so does Hornigold.
True.
But I read a story about him where he, like him and his crew all got too drunk and lost their hats. So they, instead of like, finding or buying new hats, they raided a ship and just stole the entire crew's hats and then sailed away. And so I imagine we will come back to Benjamin Hornigold one day because he sounds like a fucking character. But I wanted to go to China because that's that went, like, I always knew there were Chinese pirates, but I never really knew much about any of them.
Yeah, we usually hear the two big, I guess three. We had England, France, and Spain that all had their privateers that all kind of went rogue because they realized, wait a minute, like there's nobody that can stop us from just taking shit.
Right.
But European pirates are who we mostly hear about.
Yeah, but China was way into fucking piracy, and it got really weird with one particular pirate, simply named Limahong.
Limahong.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can kind of spell it out, but the way I have it here is Limahong. So if you want to look it up, you can.
That'll be on the test, folks. So write it
down. But if you don't pass, it doesn't matter because none of this matters.
We never passed any tests either.
Wait a minute, nothing matters, so I don't have to read this shit. Goodbye. No. So Limahong was like most criminals. He was born poor, and quickly, the way you got money if you were poor for a lot of people in the 1500s was you turned to criminal shit, and that quickly goes to piracy. And like he became really successful in like a short period of time. He ended up leading about like 2,000 pirates.
Do they have like criminal aptitude tests then, like to decide what type of crime you're going into?
I think it's kind of like a retail job. They start you as a grunt and then be like, hey, you might be good at management.
It's kind of like we talked about. I think with the piracy thing, it's like, I'd like to apply to be a pirate. Do you have a boat? Yes, you're qualified.
Yeah. Did you steal a boat? Then you're a pirate. So he jumped into piracy and was like just immediately super aggressive, attacking ports and ships throughout South China. And it got to the point where, eventually you fuck with the government long enough, they issue a warrant. And so he moved away into the high sea, kind of get out of the reach of China's military, but he would still continue to pop in and fuck with them.
I'm picturing now what you see in like TV shows all the time, kind of jokingly, like international waters, bitches, can't do anything.
Kind of, but not so much international waters. It's just like you go so far out into the sea, like they don't know where you went.
Yeah, right. And they're not really equipped to chase you down, usually.
So I read like 3 different things about this guy, and I think they all were copying off of each other, because around this point of the description of this guy, it always points out that he was, this is a quote, was married to Nadarasi. Not that he was married to a woman named Nadarasi, not that he was married to Nadarasi, who he loved dearly, not that he was married to Nadarasi, who he fucking hated. It's just, it always says Nadarasi. but there's no link or who the fuck that is.
Well, it's because she wants to stay anonymous, and that's why her name is... Nada Rossi isn't actually a name, it's just... Or maybe her name was like Rossi, and it's like, it's not a Rossi. Ha ha ha, that'll throw him off.
It could be a fucking music genre or like a punk lifestyle for all I know. I don't know what that meant.
I see, and that's what I picture, because you always hear these like sea dogs that are like, I'm married to the sea, and he's like, well, I'm married to Nada Rossi.
Well, it's kind of like, it reminded me how recently like people were talking on like Twitter all the time about like Elon Musk and how he was like dating some woman named Grimes, and I'm like, who the fuck's Grimes? You know, like, it's just, I have no idea.
Until that, the only Grimes I knew was a fictional character from The Simpsons, and Elon's kind of crazy. I mean, I could see him trying to date a fictional cartoon character.
Well, that's the thing. I don't even want to know who Elon Musk is, but I do. But like, when you just have like that one word name woman, it's like, and I'm just supposed to be like, fuck, Grimes? He's dating Rick Grimes? How? I thought... I'm so confused. Walking Dead lost the plot. Anyway, so that just baffled me how they all phrased it that way. Like all the things I read about this dude, it was always just like, oh shit, Nada Rossi, the Nada Rossi.
Well, yeah,
and then with like no link to like, and I tried looking up like who the fuck is Nada Rossi, and it's always just like she was married to Lima Hong. Oh no shit. Anyway, so in his time in the high sea, he built up his Lima Hong built up his fleets of 40 ships, and once he had a confident fleet, he went back to doing what he loved best, which was raiding South China. So
that's a hell of a fleet for a pirate.
Yeah, like, and that's kind of why there's one key thing that made me sure I wanted to tell this dude's story on here, and we'll get to that near the very end, but like the other thing that immediately pops out is anytime a pirate is also described as a warlord, like, you know, they fucking put work in.
Right. I like this guy. He's driven, you know, not like the lazy pirates that just plunder here and there.
Well, there's definitely drive, but you'll also find there's a lot of luck. Like, because he's not the brightest bulb, but we'll get to that. But he was damn determined. So during his return with his giant fleet, he attacked a city occupied by another Chinese pirate named Lin Daoqian. The reason I bring him up is just like a fun footnote on his story. He actually doesn't have as much detail as Lima Hong, but he died testing out his own cannons. So I just imagine his like grunts being like, "Sir, you might want to move," and he being like, "Don't be a pansy, fire." So he attacked this city occupied by Lin Daoqian. Lin Daoqian managed to escape the siege with 5 of Lima Hong's ships. So you would think like, oh man, Lima Hong's gonna have to take the L here. Lima Hong took 55 ships from Daoqian.
So it wasn't a fair trade.
This was a pirate on pirate fuck owning. That it basically made Lima Hong the top pirate in southern China. So after he made that attack, he started to make the transit. This was really where he kind of made the transition because he had just this giant force now. He had like 90 ships or something. This is where he really stopped being just kind of a pain in the ass for China and became like a full-blown warlord.
Right, that's he had
it's
another nation that we're fighting now.
Yeah, he had like a 3,000-man army of just warriors and outlaws, and they actually built their own kingdom on an island called Luzon.
So, like, are you sure this isn't from one of the Uncharted games or something?
Well, it's going to get more Uncharted because he decided after, he was like, all right, I have a kingdom and an army. You know what would be a good idea? Attack the Spanish Empire.
Well, yeah, but like China's getting kind of boring. I'm poning these noobs.
Well, they were a trading partner with China, and Lima Hong was like, man, fuck China and fuck anyone who likes China. So he would just start attacking Spanish settlements, but Spain was a goddamn empire, and they easily repelled a lot of his attempts until Lima Hong kind of learned about just a new established settlement of Manila. As a new point, it wasn't as easily protected by Spanish military, so Limahong expected a pretty easy capture of it. It wasn't. It ended up being like one of the bloodiest fucking and successful defenses of a settlement in
so
that
the
time.
Spain really wanted to retain their like control over envelopes and folders.
Yeah, like it's
That was a Manila joke for those that didn't catch it, but
yeah, I got it. It wasn't great, but I got it. But Manila didn't have the military force you would need to fight off a pirate fleet. So, like, it was just a disorganized townspeople at first, and they just turned to the leadership of a man named Gallo, who would later become
that's an
Don
awesome
Gallo.
name. Yeah.
So, you know, the ultimate fucking mafia setup here. But, like, he organized the townspeople to, like, for a really fierce defense. And to the point that they say, like, they were just willing to fucking die for this place. And just hold off Limahong's fleet. That they say, like, the sea was red with, like, their own blood because they were just, like, throwing themselves, you know,
Isn't
into
that such a
the woods.
cliche description, though? You always hear, like...
Yeah, totally. But I think it was, you know, it stood out because this was the first time where it was like, these are just village people. We should take this easily. And then, like, holy fuck, they're crazy. And
There's two ways to respond to a threat. You either give up or you give it your all.
Yeah, but for a newly established settlement, they were very that was
you'd
their
think they'd
home.
kind of be like, fuck this, we don't care that much.
Yeah, it's
You
like,
take it.
oh, well, fucking let the pirates have it, I guess. Especially because the military wasn't there at first.
Right.
But eventually the military did arrive, and they were led by a man named Captain Juan de Salcedo, who will be a reoccurring pain in Limahong's ass. And
Every good pirate, though, has that, like, one guy that's after him.
Yeah, there's always that, like, weird... And that guy in this he's not really any more competent than Limahong, but we'll get to that. So it's the perfect odd couple situation.
Well, again, the qualifications back then were like, do you have a boat? Cool. Which side do you want to be on?
Yeah, so Limahong, his attempts to, you know, take key Spanish points didn't really work out. So he kind of got knocked back. And he went to the Lingayen Gulf in the Pangasinan, I guess that's how it's written, region of the Philippines. It's the Philippines, is what you need to know. And thinking that was far enough away from the Chinese or Spanish presences, he just decided to rule there, which makes all those failed invasions to me seem really silly if you thought there was a place you could just set up a kingdom with no resistance.
But it's way better if you take it from somebody. Like,
sure, but you know that, like, Spain and China weren't going to let you do that.
Well, that's the thing. Like, if you go to an uninhabited or barely inhabited island, you can have it, and then you don't have that much to deal with. If you take it from somebody, even if you get it, they're going to constantly be attacking you to take it back. Like,
right?
Not too often are they going to just be like, "Well, you won. Good show, old chap."
They do kind of give him the good old chap here. So he just set up a kingdom here and then just told all the people living there in the neighboring villages that he had conquered the Spaniards, which he really fucking hadn't. And that'll come into play here shortly. So, like, he made all the villages pay him tribute as their new king, and he would hold the villages' chiefs as hostages to make sure they did. So I was saying that, like, you know, if you could just take a place, why don't you? Turns out you can't, because this area of his kingdom was also Spain's turf.
Well, to be more specific, you can. You just can't do it when a major kingdom when
people already say, hey, we have it.
Yeah, as we talked about last week, this was a point in history where the three big places, Britain, France, and Spain, were literally just like cruising around the globe like, that's ours,
right?
And if it wasn't one of the threes, if they saw it, it was theirs.
Yeah.
Like,
so yeah, this was Spain's, and Spain saw it as theirs, or at least nearby to what they considered theirs. So once they found out Limahong was still fucking with them, they just threw together a massive like force led by Juan de Salcedo to go fucking. They're like, dude, he's still picking on us. Go take him out. So Salcedo and his forces realized that where Limahong had set up his kingdom was at the head of a river, and he would need to use that to escape. So they blocked off that entire river, and then like they sent in two forces, which was a group of men in small boats up the river, and then a force of men by land to kind of go around and just sandwich Limahong's fort.
Mm-hmm. Classic.
So, yeah. So what's great about this is, like, the Spaniard forces were well coordinated, clearly, sending in two attack parties at different angles and blocking what would be the only escape route for the guy. But they were outnumbered by the pirates 10-1. So you would think the pirates would just overwhelm them. Turns out, as soon as the shooting started, once the two forces got to the forts, they started shooting. The pirates were scared shitless. They just immediately started grounding their ships and jumping overboard. Like they just freaked out completely. Like almost like having an army of pirates and outlaws won't be the most military-minded force you could put together.
Now that's sounding like that bully at school that's like just walks up and like pushes people in their lockers all the time, and then when somebody does it to him, all of a sudden they're like, "Oh fuck, what do I'm not used to being on the defensive end of this." Like,
well, it's just like you hear a gunshot. You're supposed to be an army. You hear a gunshot, and you're like, "I can't die here," and then you just jump off a boat, like,
and then most likely to die.
Yeah,
but...
to your death, pretty much.
I would have to think at this point, with as big as Limahong's army sound like it was, and probably as little resistance as they had taking this current island, that a lot of these people probably had never seen combat, like,
or at least it's always been that like uneven. I'm sure a lot of them probably joined in the ranks around when he established his kingdom and was like,
right.
Hey, I defeated the Spaniards, but it's like they hadn't really seen anything, and Limahong only really had that one successful siege of a city, which he took when he took the bulk of his fleet from that other pirate.
Or new theory, if you just went around telling everybody that you defeated Spain and all of a sudden you're being attacked by Spanish soldiers, maybe they thought they were ghosts.
That's actually how I got a job at a grocery store. I told them I beat Spain, and they still believe it. So yeah, all the pirates freaked out. The ambush completely, it worked about as well as it could when you're, outnumbered like that. And like they just abandoned like most of Limahong's fleet. They just ran off into like the mountains and shit. And once one ship caught fire, it spread to over 60 ships. And so just like a huge chunk of his fleet just went up in flames. And while this was going on, the land party successfully infiltrated the fort and managed to torch the outer area of the fort. So the fort is there's like an inner fort and an outer wall to it. So they got through the outer wall. So Limahong gets like really cooped up here. Like it's still a massive area on the inside of the fort, because he's still putting together ships and stuff. But position wise on the grand scale of combat, it's a pretty fucking terrible spot to be in.
Right.
So this leads to a long standoff in the war where they're kind of barricaded, but they can't really go out and get supplies without getting into a gunfight with Spain. And it goes on for months.
See, that's the thing when you're the attacking. If you get to that position, you just can chill as long as you want. You got supply ships that can come get you. You can probably hunt on the island. The local tribes are probably pretty happy that you're there to get rid of this guy. So yeah, it's like a vacation almost.
Yeah. So you would think like, well, Limahong's in trouble. He's got a ragtag group, and he's probably fucked here because there's only one way out, right? So Limahong in the inner walls of the fort, he was able to scavenge enough to, like, over the course of that time, and his crew, say what you will about them, but they were good, like, naval workers. So they were able to put together 30 new ships from within the fort.
Jeez.
And begin planning a new escape. This escape completely caught Spain off guard because the fleet sailed away on using a whole channel that they did not know about.
Well, that seems unlikely.
Sir,
we captured the north and south. Should we check east and west? Nah.
So some people say that it was a channel constructed in secret. So while the ships were being built, Lima Hong was putting together a whole new water channel to, like, weave his way out. But to me, it's a lot funnier to think the Spanish just never looked for it. Right. So I'm going with that. So once Salcedo realized, like, oh, fuck, he's not using this part of the river, he orders his men to, try to cut off this new channel that he had developed. So they drive a bunch of stakes into the channel that will block him off. So once Lima Hong got there, the ships would stall, and Spanish forces on both sides of the river would be waiting to open fire. This is what made me know I had to tell this story, because the imagery of it's brutal, but it's fucking hilarious. Once Lima Hong reached the stakes, he like, without fucking missing a beat, he ordered his men to have ropes tied around their shoulders and forced them to jump overboard at sword point. These men had to grab the stakes and try to pull them loose as they're being yanked up by the people on the ship to dislodge the stakes to clear away.
So you're like, it's like the little magnet fishing games that little kids have, except for it's a person on the end and they're sharp stakes.
Well, it's that, and it's kind of like, if you ever played the first Mario Party, it's kind of like the claw machine game in that, except instead of, like, being attached to a string and grabbing, like, a bag of coins or something, you have to grab a bit of wood that's, like, way driven into the ground, and like, Spanish soldiers just begin shooting you immediately.
Well, yeah, that's the problem too. It's not like you have a leisurely work day. You'd be getting shot at the whole time.
So it's a little better than Mario Party, but it's still not great. And you're just being yanked up, and they're being pulled fucking limb from limb, trying to get these stakes out, and you're being shot out. So as cartoonish as this is, it actually worked.
Well, for him, not for the guys on the ropes.
The crew got fucked.
Yeah, perspective's a bitch.
But the improvisation worked for him, and enough stakes got pulled free for him, and the fleet was able to escape into the Chinese Sea. Not much is really, like, this is kind of the highlight of Lima Hong's career, and it's really just him barricading himself and then having to do the sloppiest escape ever for a pirate. He would later find his last refuge on an island. He would build another, quote, kingdom.
Lima Hong Kong.
That would be a better name than Takautikin, or whatever the hell they call it. But yeah, he would eventually die there. But that's, it's a little bit on the shorter
end. I mean, it's a pretty sweet, like, ending to the story, though. You get to retire after being, like, successful for, it sounds like, your first 10th of your career, and then just basically bungling everything else that you do, but still, like, getting in a position where you can retire to the point of, like, just making your own country. Like,
yeah, where you're just like, whew, nobody found me out that I was a big fraud. But yeah, I mean, like, his whole thing in life, if he was just a pirate, he would have been, just a notorious one for China because he was such a pain in their ass. But when he, like, tried to make that jump into being, like, a warlord and taking over places, it just never seemed to end well.
Yeah. He tried to get too big.
And but I mean, at the same time, he went pretty far. He was married to Nada Rossi, which is huge, apparently.
He lived and got to, like, just, it sounds like, die of, we'll say old age, which is usually still like 37.
Yeah, pirate old age. He was my age, so
and
I'm
probably
close.
Died slowly of, like, syphilis and.
Yeah.
So yeah, probably not like the sweet, like, sunset retirement, die in your sleep that that we picture now. For
you
but,
get the pirate equivalent of that, where you're just like, I have only drank seawater, and I'm going crazy. Where's Nadarasi?
Where's my leaden goblet? Because lead was the fancy like dinnerware back then.
Yeah, it's weird. Like another part of like the realism of pirates is like always like the skin fucking diseases and shit they had. And
yeah, I mean all these tropical places where you don't have immunities to things. Like I wasn't joking, they used lead for their like plates and goblets, which gives you lead poisoning, which leads to insanity. Like just not a lot of good stuff going on if you're a pirate, but you got a lot of money, gold.
What's kind of interesting to me is like in all the like artwork of like I could find of like Chinese pirates, like they always had like a green pigment to their skin. Like it was very like a World of Warcraft ogre look. That it was very weird. And I wonder if that's just that's the only color they had, or like these fuckers were actually turning green.
Green.
But yeah, that's the story of Limahong. Like I said, I'm not gonna bombard you with pirate stories every week on this show, but
you want to.
But I definitely want to. But like there's a lot of characters like this that like their stories must be told poorly by me. But yeah, that's Limahong, and that's what I got this week.
He set out with a goal. He kind of accomplished it. He bungled it and still came out ahead.
Good for him. He came out alive.
Right.
Never really fucked with Spain again.
Yeah.
Poor crew.
Don't mess with Spain. Well, now you probably can, but back then, don't mess with Spain.
Don't try to take Manila now. That would be my suggestion. If it didn't work back then.
See, my story this week's a very similar story about, your guy started with nothing and worked hard to be unsuccessful. And my guy started with everything and didn't work hard to be very successful.
Steve, I told you can't just read The Great Gatsby on the show. You gotta.
And I just wanted to say that for tonal like contrast. He did work hard. I'm sure that's not fair.
I'll be the judge of that.
So, Robert Garrett was born in 1875 to a wealthy family in, I think, Maryland. I didn't write that part down because it's not important. I don't fucking care where he came from.
It's only the first sentence. You could have chosen when you started writing your notes.
I know. I'm kind of surprised by myself that I didn't put that down, but it doesn't really matter. So, born in 1875, wealthy family, like all male children back then of wealthy families. He loved sports because that was one way to differentiate yourself from the poor people that had to like work 8 days a week somehow. So anyway, he loved sports and he participated in like the main sport of the time, which was track and field. Very exciting time to be a sports fan. He enrolled in Princeton and joined the track team.
So let's break down, because I'm dumb. Track and field, that's just running in a circle, right?
There's variations of running, but it's also like the long jump and the high jump and the shot put, which was his speciality.
Okay.
So, and that's what he joined the track team at Princeton, but he was successful, but he was never at the top of the running sports. So he took up shot put, and he was a very good shot putter. He won a lot of the tournaments, and he certainly led his school in that. But when he enrolled in Princeton, it was like 18, like 94, I think, right around there, 93, 94. Well, in 1896, some dudes over in it was Greece and France. I don't know why France had anything to do with this, but they decided to bring back the Olympics. It had been a few 100 years, and they thought it was a good time to revive the sport. So
it's gone long enough. We need we need sports that people will only pretend to care about every 4 years.
Americans are about to invent baseball and football, and we can't compete on any stage with that. So we need to do something now. So yeah, 1896 was the first scheduled Olympics of the modern era. And this guy, Robert Garrett, decided he wanted to be an Olympian. By Jove, I think that's what they would have said back then.
By golly, I'm gonna do it. And then a song broke out.
Oh, yeah, one of the of course, everything was song back then. But one of the cool things that I kept seeing was that these Olympics were to be held under the supervision of Greek Prince... where did I just read it? Oh, Greek Prince Constantine, which is a great name for a prince. And, like, how cool does that sound, like, to be like, I am holding the Olympic competition. Now, you know, like, when we had the Olympics here in the United States, they were held under the supervision of, like, Gloria Estefan and Little Richard. But they had Prince Constantine, like,
They had Greek Prince Constantine, which sounds like a rapper. If you always say Greek Prince Constantine.
He probably was. That was pretty big in the 1800s.
Yeah, this show brought to you by Greek Prince Constantine, on tour now.
So now we have the Olympics, an international competition to prove what country is better than other countries. I think that's what the Olympics are about.
Objectively.
Which is, of course, just a magnet for these, like, privileged, wealthy American athletes. Like, that's one of those things that, like, as I get older, the more I watch the Olympics, I kind of bothers me when I watch this. Like, you're rooting for the United States, or at least I am. But then it's like, oh yeah, this kid grew up on the slopes of Aspen skiing every day. And like, now over to the Ethiopian skiers. And you're like, oh, fuck.
Who had to scratch and claw for a meal every day. But he's here to compete as well. Yeah.
He formed his own skis out of clay. So yeah.
His skis are the bones of his family members.
And it takes a little bit of the joy for me out when now I get that there's all sorts of athletes from all sorts of countries from all sorts of backgrounds. But anyway, he was one of this Robert Garrett was one of the wealthy athletes that decided he wanted to go show off how good he was at sports. So of course he was going to go
at shot put.
At shot, no. Well, he did. He competed at shot put, but this guy, this is why he caught my attention, because it turns out, other than the wealth part, he's a lot like me. When they brought the Olympics back, they initially just focused on the classic Greek sports. You know, they had the track and field stuff and the wrestling, but they were going to compete in a sport called discus throw. Well, Robert Garrett didn't really know what the discus throw was, but he knew that there were not any American discus throwers, because nobody in America knew what the discus, was as a, scholars had a general idea of it from history, but there was not competitive discus throwing in the United States at all. So one way to ensure your spot on the American discus throwing team is
to say you wanted to play discus.
Right. Which was fucking genius. And as soon as I heard that, I'm like, I like this guy.
Yeah.
Problem was, there were no coaches over here to tell you how to throw a discus, and there were no discuses over here. But he went to Princeton. So what he did is he spent a lot of time in the Greek studies department, reading through classic literature on the Olympics. A lot of Greek poems and stuff focused on the Olympics. That was one of their things. A lot of Greek art focused on the Olympics. And that's why he'd look at artifacts that had depictions of discus throwers. And using this information, he sent away to have a blacksmith custom make him a discus so he could learn how to, practice, learn how to throw. And so he gets back this custom-made discus that was 12 inches in diameter and just over 30 pounds.
And oddly enough, had a star on it, and it was made out of that same shit from Captain
Vibranium
America.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he gets this discus back, and he's all excited, and he goes out to throw it, and he tries. There's a couple different versions of this. Having him try at the school before they go over there. The problem is, at best, he can throw it like a foot, because this fucking thing is heavy and awkward, and he just can't get it to go anywhere. So the other version
won't fly. There must be a better way.
The other version talks about, so back in 1896, when you're competing in Greece for the Olympics, the way to get to Greece was by boat, steam-powered boat. You couldn't fly there. So a lot of the
chump.
Well, yeah, the athletes should have been able to.
A real
damn
Olympian would get there.
But so apparently, a lot of the athletes spent their time on deck of this boat when they were, voyaging across the sea, practicing for their events, doing calisthenics and push-ups and that kind of stuff.
I'm just imagining like the boat at the beginning of that Bruce Lee movie, Enter the Dragon, and like some fucking mean Australian guy or whatever like comes out and like he's like a great discus thrower. And he's like, "What's your style?"
That would have been helpful for him because the whole time on the boat he's trying to throw this damn discus and he can't do it. But Robert Garrett is not a wimp. He's not going to just give up. He figures when they get to Greece, he'll be able to like talk to some athletes and watch them and figure. And he's that sure of himself that he thinks, as soon as I see these people do it, I'll be able to do it too.
Zeus's lightning bolt will hit me next, and I'll be great.
Right. So that's what he figures. You'd imagine he has to be a little bit nervous because even if you're not familiar with the world of discus throwing, if it's an Olympic sport, you got to figure they're not dealing in like inches as far as the distance. But so he figures they'll get there and he'll learn. The problem was there's just problems all over the place for this guy. So the Americans get to Greece all ready for the Olympics that were set to start on April 16th. What they didn't take into account is Greece still used the old Julian calendar, and the Olympics were actually set to start on April 6th, which was the day after they arrived in Greece. And so they had to fucking book it just to get to the Olympic venue. And it says that they literally got there like as the opening ceremonies were going on. So that's already something that would frazzle most people. But if you're this guy that figures, oh, I've got time to figure this out, it gives me a week to practice. And they're like, oh, no, it doesn't.
I'm kind of... Sorry, I'm a little confused by this guy's attitude of like, I'm going to just like, to be an Olympian, I'm going to just dive into a random sport. But then I'm going to like freak out that like, oh, I can't learn the sport before the event. It's like... Those guys like fucking trained for like full seasons for this shit.
That's what you think. That's what at this point, I think before I even like left to go over there, I'd be like, oh, I got a discus injury. I can still compete at shot put, but my discus muscle is all shot to hell. And then when you get there and find out that like, oh, welcome to Greece. You're competing in 20 minutes. You'd think you'd be like, oh, fuck, I've got food poisoning.
But, these are always the best stories of like the jig is up, but the dude will never admit it.
Well, there is one spot of good news that he discovered when he got there.
Whoa.
So
Jesus, sorry.
No, that was that's the good news indicator. Da da.
Yeah.
So he gets there, no time to practice. He can't throw a fucking discus to save his life. Turns out his 12-inch, 30-some pound discus was way off, and the actual competitive discus was 8 inches and just over 5 pounds. So he had been off by a factor of like 600%. You imagine the different accounts act like, oh, he stepped right into the ring and had no time to practice. Realistically, I think they had some warm-up rounds and that kind of stuff. But still, you're going in, like you said, you're competing against people that grew up like, I'm a discus thrower. And you're against a guy that shows up from America like, I'm here to throw that's a discus. Neat. Like, he literally hadn't even
heavy, huh?
seen one. And so he gets his 3 throws, and the first one's pretty bad. The second one goes end over end, almost into the crowd. And then he takes his third throw, and the fucking disc flies 95 feet, 7.5 inches, which
holy
was
bitch.
Not only enough to win the competition, but was a new world record.
Fucking damn, dude.
Right.
Whoa.
So I guess that shows why, like, no matter how bad your odds look, like, I don't know what I'm doing, but there's nobody else in America to compete against, so I'm assured a spot. And he even said he figured he'd finish last or down towards. He didn't go there expecting to win, but he is the kind of guy that's like, I think his exact quote was something like, well, I want to compete in as many things as I can because competing is fun. So you imagine him pushing his glasses a little bit back up his nose as he
I also want to do the joust.
But there was a travel writer that was there, and he wrote, this is an exact quote, all were stupefied. The Greeks had been defeated at their own classic exercise. And then he goes on to say that that they were overwhelmed by the superior skill and daring of the Americans, who they ascribed supernatural invincibility, which enabled them to dispense with training and to win at games which they had never even seen before. And sounds good, and it sounds awesome. You're like, fuck yeah, America. We're that much better than you. I think it goes back to the revisionist history at that point. You win a game by sheer dumb fucking luck. Like I said, the guy was athletic. He threw the shot. And I guess if you train with a 2-pound discus and then it turns out to be 5 pounds, like,
yeah, I
guess that's one way to do it. But kind of like...
That's some Dragon Ball ass training there. It's like, I'm going to wear really heavy wristbands and stuff, and once I take those off, damn, I'll be fast.
But on top of the discus, he won the shot put event as well, and he placed second in the long jump and high jump. So that apparently the like long storied history of America dominating in the Olympics and making everybody hate us started with the very first modern Olympics. I don't know how that ranks overall. I didn't look up. There weren't medal. It wasn't like you got gold, you got silver. It was, they literally just, placed first, second, third, whatever.
I don't like that. I don't like the. He was the first Tim Tebow. Like, he fucking bullshitted his way into some success. And
I know, and that's why he's my hero. I mean, he obviously had skills, but more than skills, he was a fucking just blind idiot. Like, I can do it. Sure, why not?
Yeah, discus that was like a medieval weapon, right? Yeah, I could throw that.
I'm the exact opposite. Somebody's like, "Oh, do you want to try this thing that you've never tried before?" It's like, no.
My thing would be just I get to go to Greece. I don't care if I get last place. But that was kind of probably his. Just be good.
Well, and you got to imagine, I guess it probably helped that it wasn't like the Olympics were televised, and ABC wasn't there making a multi-billion-dollar worldwide event out of it. So if you were going to fall on your ass and completely fail, maybe the 80 people in the stands were going to see it, and then the people would read about it back home. But still, like I said, most of us, if there's a chance that you might fail miserably and look like an idiot in front of a crowd of people, even if it's 5 people, I'm like, no thanks.
Yeah, I fell quietly with a crowd of 10 followers on Twitter, and I'm still like, that's too much. The shame.
And like I said, the various things that you read about it give different timelines to things, how long he trained before with this wrong discus, how long he had in Greece to observe and get used to the correct way to discus and that kind of stuff. But either way, it's an amazing, even if you had a week, how do you go from not knowing what a sport actually is to being the Olympic champion in a week?
Doesn't that say more about the sport?
Yes.
Really, at the end of the day,
this is also a tale of why they started adding actual sports to the Olympics, because they were like, yes, the first official Olympic is over.
You can watch people play basketball, but once you get on the court, that's not going to teach you form and footwork and shit. If your whole event is just throwing a shit in a weird way,
and that's probably another moral or factor that. You get these things. It's like golf. I know you've golfed. I used to golf, but it's too expensive and time consuming. But it's an ingrained sport, and you can't go out there without people being, okay, now what you do is you put your head down, your shoulders have to be here, your feet have to be here. When you swing back, your hips go here. So there's this ideal motion and form to it that they try to ingrain in you. And then with golf, everybody's swings are a little different. With discus, I imagine the same deal though. They had discus coaches and whatnot, and here's the form, and you want to hold your elbow here, and you want to strive for this. So some dude that's not used to all that just comes in and he's like, well, this is what my body feels like I need to do in order to be successful. And hey, it works better than trying some ridiculous shit. I don't know. Who knows what went into it? Maybe it's just all the steroids that they took.
Yeah, that's the part that's conveniently left out. The opium juice.
Yeah, I was going to say opium was pretty big back then. Maybe he didn't actually win the Olympics. Everybody was just so damn high. They
were he fucking threw it 100 feet. Oh my God.
Yo, man, did you see that? It turned into a bird. bird and it flew and it landed right here.
Dude.
But then it flew away, so it's gone now.
Dude, he threw that disc. It went into the sun.
Winner.
That's a new world record. He's a god. Oh man.
It was a short story, but as soon as I came, and it's something I had seen a couple months ago, but I'm like, man, this is hilarious, and I have to talk about it. Like I said, it's kind of the exact opposite of yours, where this guy started with every advantage except for knowing what the fuck he was doing, and then he did it.
And then he did it. Yeah, that's the American path to success. Bumblefuck your way to whatever accolades.
And then when this writer comes by and he's like, oh, and the Greek were stupefied, and the Americans were so fucking good. Everybody else sucks, but we're gods. And you don't correct them. Like, I got lucky. You're like, yeah.
Greeks were stupefied. They're probably not. They're probably like, well, he threw a rock pretty far. Good for him.
Right.
Because and
it's one of those things with competitions too, where, well, I don't know. I guess what puts the nail in the coffin. I was gonna say maybe he just had a lucky throw and they just had bad day. Athletes, that's the shitty thing about being an athlete, is sometimes you can be clearly the better team or better individual athlete and just have a bad day. That's why I always say that's why they play the games or the matches instead of just being like, well, this team's better, they win.
To be fair though, like if he didn't know what the fucking sport was, how did he come up with a better training method by throwing something heavier? Like, how did? But only
throwing it like a foot, like that felt good. That felt good.
Yeah, but like, how did nobody else think to like, hey, maybe if we like use weighted discuses, then.
Right. I mean, it's like the batters in baseball that like swing 3 bats or put the rings on the bats or swing 3 bats with rings on them.
Yeah. Which I always thought was probably just like a placebo effect.
Oh,
like,
definitely.
That's like when you do like, you don't even have to do that many. Just do like 10 push-ups and then pick up the remote. And then you're like, fuck, man.
I'm so strong.
I could crush this. And I will.
That's the best part about working out. Not that I do much of it, but yeah, afterwards you're like, I am invincible.
Holy shit, I'm fucking jacked. And then you see yourself in the mirror, it's like, well,
now I want a pickle. Fuck, I can't get it open.
Well, maybe I'm not jacked, but I can definitely eat this pizza now guilt-free.
So, yeah, that's what I've got this week. Little bit shorter episode, but I think still jam-packed.
I think we said in the first episode we're aiming between 45 minutes to an hour.
Yep.
And as we get more familiar with the format and we keep doing episodes, there's going to be less preamble, so we're right where we need to be.
Yeah.
Because this is just a little window to the dumb shit you'll find on the internet. And
there's so much of it out there.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. This is really a fun show to do.
And if nothing else, what's so great about it is with both of us doing a story, now I'm doubling the useless, stupid knowledge that I had. Because, like, I knew this stuff. I had this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. But now I've got your stuff, too. And it's like, pretty soon I'm just going to be sitting at work drooling because there'll be no room for actual useful knowledge. It'll all just be like,
I have so much unimportant information swirling in my head. It's great.
Did you know that Li Hong? It was a Li Hong or Lin Hong?
Limahong.
Limahong. Did you know that Limahong used his crew as human claw machines?
Oh my god.
I'm just here to buy insurance, Steve. What the fuck are you talking about?
Like, I don't know how people like agree to that, where it's like jump overboard at sword point or
yeah, if you don't do this, I'll kill you quickly.
But it's like, yeah, but I'm gonna get shot or like ripped
or
apart.
have my limbs that, if nothing else, dislocated. Like,
yeah,
like, yeah, stab me.
Yeah, fuck this.
He'd be calling his bluff anyway because he needs you just as much as you need him.
Yeah, like, you get overboard, fucker. I have a sword too. Now I'm in charge.
Yeah. Like the guy who tested his own cannons, so that didn't work either. But
yeah, Lindaki. Just like, I don't. It was probably a really nice day. And he was like, I'm going to go.
No enemies in sight. He woke up, he had his tea and took a nice stroll. And he's like, you know what? We're going to see what happens if we fill the cannon all the way up with gunpowder.
I bet he was building his fleet back up to like get his ship back from Limahong. He was like, all right, just test these cannons. We'll be good to go. And then
I want to think, too, when you say test the cannon, I'd like to think he was making some like really elaborate Rube Goldberg machine just to see if he could do it with the cannons. Like, that way, if an enemy comes, they'll trip this wire, and this wire will move this cannon. This cannon will make this marble roll down, and the marble will make their cannon go off. And then it did, and it blew him to pieces.
I'm imagining like a Looney Tunes, like he fired the cannon and the ball went all the way around the world and then hit him.
Yeah.
Cannon worked too well.
This is the other reason we pick history, is we can make fun of somebody like getting horribly blown up.
Nobody's gonna be like, hey, you shouldn't talk shit about Lin Dowkian. He's like, he was a fucking pirate. Fuck him.
You say that, tomorrow we'll get the cease and desist letter in the mail, but
the family of Lin Dowkian. It was actually very
That's
tragic.
slander.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing I didn't mention with Limahong, is like that area where he set up his kingdom. Like they say that like a lot of the people in that area of the Philippines are like direct descendants of like him, and I imagine that's probably not as true as a lot of them probably want it to be, but like he's like a big deal in that area. Like I think there's a statue of him and shit, which is very weird for like somebody who was not actually king for only a couple of months. So it's interesting.
Well, the running theme, we're only 3 episodes in, but the running theme so far seems to be just say you can do something, like the Doctor's back with the Dancing Mania, or Garrett with his discus, or Limahong. You just say it and it's true.
Yeah, if there's anything you can take away from this show, I've certainly experienced it in my life, is just bullshit, and people will let you do things you're not qualified to do. Like this show.
Sorry, folks, we're going to have to suspend the flight. We can't find the pilot. I can fly. All right, here you go.
If it's got wings, I've flown it. But yeah, this has been episode 3 of the Non-Essential Podcast. Coming out every Tuesday. It's supposed to be every Tuesday.
Tuesday when the website wants to cooperate with me. Last week you got a treat and got it at like randomly at 11:30 Monday night, because I went in and said schedule post. Okay, hit, and it's like published. So whoa, no.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So just keep an eye on the Non-Essential Podcast Twitter. It's at Non-Essential Pod. And if it's out early, then you get it early. Congratulations. You can also find us on the it's Libsync or whatever. What's the site?
Libsyn.
Libsyn.
It's the non-essential. Yeah, the non-essential at .libsyn.com. If you just Google Non-Essential Podcast, you should find it.
There's
iTunes,
a link on Twitter.
Facebook, Instagram. For some reason, I don't understand Instagram. It's just pictures. But there's pictures that I put up.
It's good. It's good promotional shit, I guess. Shows also go up on YouTube, so any way you want to listen, there's a way to listen.
We're just gonna like cram this down your throats, but. And remember, I actually made a note of this. You got to throw this boilerplate in. Your likes and subscriptions and shares and retweets and comments. They both flatter and terrify us because we're not used to it. So,
but keep doing it. Tell your friends, because we like doing the show and we like getting more ears on it. So, getting those ears rubbing up against us.
Ears on, Ben.
I got an ear thing going. The show's brought out a kink. I need your ears. But yeah, we'll be back next week.
Yeah, that's the show. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.